What's up everyone, welcome back to Beyond AR TV. My name is John and today I'm jumping aboard the trend of doing these tier rankings, the ranked list, whatever. iDubbbz started it, my girlfriend Infinity on Hannah did one, and she made a template which she was kind enough to make me one as well. If you guys want to do this for yourself, then check out the link down below in the pinned comment or else in the description. Today on this tier ranking, I'm going to be doing a power ranking for the most successful bands of the 2000s and the power that I feel that their name holds. These bands were all compiled together from Google. I typed in literally just most successful bands of the 2000s. It gave me a big list and then Hannah picked off 20 of them. So we're gonna go through, and from S being like satisfactory, top of the line, and then bottom of the totem pole F, rank every single one and put them where I feel that they belong, and I'm gonna try to not let my personal bias influence it all that much. But then again, I know a lot of these bands are going to be ones that I love, so it's gonna be very hard to do. Make sure you watch till the end of the video though, because I might change my mind, you never know. At the very end of the video, I'm gonna take a look and make sure I stand by where I put everything. I might move a few around, so keep in mind that at the end of the day, it is just my opinion of these very commercially successful 2000s bands. It wasn't necessarily limited to one genre, so we could go from metal to pop to rock and alternative. So I hope you enjoy the video today. Please drop a like on it if you do. Let's start the ranking. It's appropriate that we're starting off with A for Arctic Monkeys. These aren't in alphabetical order as you can see, but we have the Arctic Monkeys first. So let's drag them on down and see where I want to put such an influential English band. These guys definitely had a huge impact both internationally and in the United States. There were some people that didn't quite take them seriously, but I felt that they had a pretty solid sonic evolution during that time. They're one of those bands that it's hard to be loved in both the US and the UK sometimes, and they definitely pulled that off. So while they're not quite God tier level, I'm gonna put them at an A because, I feel like they earned an A. U2, my boys Bono, The Edge, and U2 are up next. So I think that in the 2000s, and I'm purely basing this on the fact that we're talking about that decade, they had kind of fallen off. They weren't putting out Joshua Tree or anything like that. Instead, we were getting like No Line on the Horizon or whatever it was, and How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. There were some good songs on those records, but overall, U2 were kind of fading at that point. I'm not entirely sure where to put them for the 2000s because I still have respect for them, but that decade wasn't that kind to them, especially as much as they hyped up their records. I'm gonna give them a D. The Red Hot Chili Peppers are up next on the agenda, and the 2000s were kind of a period of growth and revitalization in a mainstream sense for them. They had some magical records. We got By the Way and Stadium Arcadium, which actually happened to be my two favorite records from them. But just on a purely commercial sense, the impact that I feel they had, I know they're extremely important, even though they are one of my favorite bands. I feel that maybe this wasn't their biggest period in some fans' hearts, but in a commercial sense, you really have to respect the hustle, the fact that they put themselves back out there like that. I'm gonna put them at a B. Paramore are coming into play next, and this was a very different time in the band. This was, of course, back before all of the changes of style, the loss of members, everything like that. There was sort of a revolving door in some of those early times. But Paramore in those days were not exactly my favorites. Their earlier records definitely have something to them, but in a commercial sense, it was crazy to see what they were able to do with Hayley Williams at the front of it all. They weren't quite topping the charts, but then again, they were having some top 40 hits, a commercial peak that they didn't hit again until their self-titled record. I'm gonna put Paramore at a B, just because it was impressive how they were able to grow, mature, and remain commercially viable in that decade, leading all the way through Brand New Eyes in '09. Maroon 5, Can't Knock the Hustle, huh? And their early days, Adam Levine and company, not all that bad at all. Songs About Jane is kind of a pop classic of the 21st century in its own right. And their second album, It Won't Be Soon Before Long, I feel that it's underrated. Early Maroon 5 stuff was pretty damn good. They evolved nicely into their second record. They transition out of being Kara's Flowers. I'm gonna give them a C. I mean, the early stuff, I mean, I'm kind of a sucker for it. With Coldplay being next, we've again got one of those bands from the UK, those British groups that broke through and just started exploding because they literally put out their first album in 2000 and they carried themselves all the way through the end of that decade. I mean, they didn't get their first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 until 2008 with Viva La Vida, and I think Viva La Vida was their best record, so it was incredible to see how they were able to grow and evolve despite a lot of the hate that they did get. They were too pop for rock, but too rock for pop, and they were still super successful in between. Putting my interest in them aside, I have to give them an A. Blink-182 are kind of tough to categorize because the late 90s, I would say, was the peak in terms of people like absolutely loving them. I mean, maybe their most commercially successful album was, I think, 2001's album, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. I also think that's their best record personally. But in terms of like commercial viability, they kind of started waning after that 2001 record because you had First Date, singles like that, and in the subsequent years, I mean, they went on hiatus for 4 years, and then the end of the decade, they really weren't that active. They still remained huge and had a big following. I'm debating between D and C here. I think I'm gonna be generous and give them a C, and because obviously I do love Blink-182, especially that 2000 stuff. Oh, the divisive Fall Out Boy, you're up next. Where will we go on our ranked list today? Are we talking F? Are we talking S? Are we talking somewhere in between? Pete Wentz, Patrick Stump and company here are one of those groups that definitely divided people because you got some people screaming, oh, these are just emo edgelords trying way too hard to write deep lyrics, and then some people genuinely connected with their stuff. And 2000's Fall Out Boy is quintessential Fall Out Boy. I mean, past that, you know, obviously they went on hiatus, almost broke up in 2009 after Folie à Deux, and I really genuinely feel they were one of the most impactful bands of the decade, one of the most influential. Blink-182 was carrying the torch for the late 90s, and now we got Fall Out Boy coming in and doing something tremendous for the 2000s. I have to put them in an S, just because of how outrageously popular they were, but also simultaneously the albums that they were putting out were fantastic. Surprisingly enough, Evanescence were a huge force in the early to mid and even late 2000s decade. They were really popular. They even scored some hits on their second album, The Open Door. I think people in the mainstream would probably at least know their name during that decade, and name recognition, especially back then, that's a huge thing to have. They had Bring Me to Life, they had Call Me When You're Sober, a lot of other hit songs. I'm gonna have to be generous on this one, even though I'm not a crazy Evanescence fan. They definitely had a big impact, and I would say during the 2000s, they were kind of equivalent to what Blink-182 were doing in some ways. I'm gonna put them at a C. Makes me happy to see System of a Down listed as one of the most commercially successful bands of the 2000s. This, of course, was compiled by Google, and I figured that they were, but I didn't want to assume. System of a Down were so crazy. Their energy that they had, the voice that they carried, and their politics, everything else. It would seem off-putting, but they still sold millions and millions and millions of records. From Hypnotize and Mesmerize and even Toxicity, the 2000s were incredible to them. They haven't put out a record since '05. But it's crazy. I haven't seen too many bands like that still have such a large following. I'm about to see them live for the first time. They are a headliner. They're headlining a festival in 2019 and they haven't put out a record since '05. Definitely an S here for System of a Down. They even had a hit song in the form of BYOB. That was like a top 40 hit in America. How? I'm a little bit surprised to see Yeah Yeah Yeahs on this list of the most successful bands of the 2000s. I think that they definitely had some hits. I mean, Maps was like a staple of the indie movement. It inspired a lot of other bands. They're a really, really great band that knew how to experiment, change things up, stay true to themselves while also maintaining a following. And that's hard to do. It's hard to stay true to yourself and hold to your guns. I gotta give them a B. Of course, everyone's favorite animated band, Gorillaz, of course fronted by Damon Albarn, Jamie Hewlett doing the art direction and everything like that. Gorillaz were so strange. They were something that I couldn't even fully comprehend when I was growing up during that decade. Of course, they have a large rabid fan base still, and I admire a lot of what they do. So this is really the times where I feel divided on this list because, again, like I said, trying to put my own personal bias aside and say, what did this group, what did this band do for the decade? And I feel that Gorillaz kind of removed some of the stigma that hip-hop couldn't be in rock and be taken seriously, and they couldn't combine other genres into what they were doing, and Gorillaz changed it up with every album that they put out. I think the Gorillaz really proved a lot of people wrong. I'm gonna give them a B. Papa Roach, what the hell do I do with you? Well, of course, we had Infest, Love, Hate, Tragedy, Getting Away with Murder, all of these angsty try-hard titles, but there were occasionally some good songs on there. I know I've definitely roasted Papa Roach a few times in my day, but of course, they had a few songs also, Getting Away with Murder. I mean, there were some songs on there that I definitely connected with, and I also feel that there was a public disdain for them in some ways, but there were also a lot of people that if you ask them now, like if they're in their mid-20s, maybe early 30s and stuff, did you like Papa Roach back in the day? They would know the name, recognize some of the songs, but also, I think that they were mainly known more for their singles. I'm gonna have to give them a D. The try not to be biased challenge just intensified here, because my favorite band of all time, Green Day, actually made the list. And yes, they really did supercharge themselves during this decade. I mean, American Idiot, and that coming out after 9/11, after George W. Bush took office, it being so political, but also being so smart with the way that it tackled politics, love, and did so throughout the course of a rock opera masterpiece. That record was game-changing in so many different ways that won them a ton of new fans. Obviously, they had hit songs, number ones all over the place. Boulevard of Broken Dreams almost topped the Billboard Hot 100. All of the singles from that record did well, and 21st Century Breakdown followed that up and was very successful again. And we also cannot forget about Warning that came out at the start of that decade. I mean, I gotta give them an A, not just because they're my favorite band, but because they were literally one of the most popular bands, one of the most influential of the 2000s. I'll admit to not knowing a ton about Arcade Fire just because they've kind of been one of those bands that I can't fully get into. But in the 2000s, it's kind of weird to know that they were one of the most successful. I would say they were definitely in the indie sphere, one of the biggest. Obviously, all the bloggers at the time were eating them up, but the overall impact and the name recognition wasn't necessarily there yet. So for a power ranking, I think they're a little bit lower down. I'm gonna have to put them at an E. My Chemical Romance are up next on this, and I definitely knew that they were one of the most commercially successful. I mean, before I even looked anything up, I could have told that to you. Black Parade and Three Cheers in particular sold millions of copies each. My Chemical Romance, I think, represented something for that decade, and I would say that the 2000s are like the most emo decade that we've probably ever had. I mean, I wasn't alive back in like the 1880s, for example. I mean, maybe they had an emo phase where they got really introspective and in touch with their feelings back then, but I kind of doubt it. The 2000s represented something different. I mean, My Chemical Romance were not the traditional rock stars. They were these pasty dudes from New Jersey playing music that was a little bit too weird and scary for some people, but it also spoke to the voice of a generation, the future voices, and now we see them having a lasting impact now. I mean, teenagers, know their music, and that's still something that people recognize. So My Chemical Romance have to go up there at S. You gotta hand it to Nickelback. I mean, as much as they might be the most hated band in the world, they were so successful. I mean, like, All the Right Reasons that came out in 2005, that sold more than 7 million records. 7 million copies of that album are floating around the United States, like 15 million worldwide bought All the Right Reasons. You also had Silver Side Up and whatever the hell else they did after that, the record Dark Horse in '08, that wasn't bad. I don't hate All the Right Reasons. I think that they unfairly get hated a little bit too much. I mean, to be fair, they're super generic a lot of the times, but they have their songs, they have their moments. I think a lot of people don't give them credit for that. And they're like, why were they successful? Because they had catchy songs. And yes, they might be formulaic, but they were so successful. And for that reason, just their power ranking alone, the 2000s, that was Nickelback's decade. They conquered the shit out of it. and they're at an A. Keep in mind with all of these rankings, again, this is not me speaking to the quality of the music, more so the impact that they had on shaping the decade. The New York City band, The Strokes, of course. Of course, they started off so high with Is This It?, which is a monumental record. What an accomplishment right there. I mean, they not only invaded and took over New York City where they were from, but it extended to the rest of the world. I mean, people overseas that didn't even speak the language were connecting with this shit. They inspired so many bands in the indie community and the DIY and even the punk. Some punk bands list The Strokes as an influence for them. And that voice that Julian Casablancas has, it's something that kind of drones on in places. It might seem a bit droll, but they know exactly what the hell they're doing. It was just crazy to me to see them take over. I think we have to recognize exactly what they did. I am going to give The Strokes a B. We have to pay some respects here at our very last one. Appropriate, I suppose, that Linkin Park are the final one to talk about because, again, these were some of the guys that defined music of the 2000s. They defined angst and rage and what it was like to go through struggles and really serious things, and they were put into songs. Again, they blended genres, but it wasn't like Limp Bizkit or something, which if they were here, they would definitely be in the F tier. But it was blending rock, hip-hop, a little bit of electronic music, swirling in a DJ Joe Han, and putting it all together. And it connected with such a large audience. I mean, Hybrid Theory is certified diamond, and I don't think I need to tell any of you chart followers out there how rare that is. Meteora followed that up, and it's the only album still to this day to have all of its singles go to #1 on the alternative charts, which was known as the modern rock charts at the time. Linkin Park stole the show with this decade, and as much as I would probably be inclined to put them at an A, we're talking commercial here, and they had multiple top 10 hits, even on the Billboard Hot 100, I gotta put them at an S. Now that we've reached the end of this, let's go through and see if I need to make any adjustments. Now in the S category, we have Fall Out Boy, System of a Down, Green Day, MCR, and Linkin Park. I think that I stand by all of those, and I know that some of my favorite bands are in there, and it's easy to say, well, John is just putting them there because they are some of his favorite bands of all time. It just so happens that I guess I was attracted to what a lot of other people were as well. I'm a basic bitch, I admit that. I genuinely do love all of these bands though, and I loved the fact that they were commercially successful. That's why I love the 2000s so much, because there is variety here. I mean, the differences between System of a Down, Green Day, and Fall Out Boy, just the first three in the S category, the superior ranking right there, it's incredible. Looking through everything else here, I don't see any major disagreements or anything that's tripping me up too much. I think I'm pretty satisfied with how I put together everything here, so this is my power ranking for bands of the 2000s, the most successful bands according to Google. If you want to see me do this again, maybe a part 2, a follow-up, I think Hannah gave me a good idea when she said that I should take on maybe solo artists of 2000 up until now, so we could go across 2 decades here. I think it might be a lot of fun. If you guys do enjoy this video, I might do a power ranking for pop solo stars. Anyways, let me know what you think of how I rated these bands today. Keep in mind, it wasn't just on my personal preferences, but this was based on their commercial impact and the influence that I feel they had, how strong of a grip I thought they had on that decade. Leave your thoughts in the comments section down below, and don't forget to subscribe for the love of music. Please drop a like on the video while you're here today, and of course, if you want to check out Hannah's video that inspired mine, then please click this link right over here. Don't forget to check out another recent review that I uploaded to the channel right over here, and connect with me on social media, including my Patreon page, and all of the links in the description down below. I'll see you soon for more right here on Beyond AR TV.